I may have said that painting relates as much to life as it does to art, or vice versa, but I don't think so. I said that you couldn't make either. And you had to work in that hole between.
During the 1950s, abstract expressionists had already become cemented into art history, pioneering a new artistic mode of thinking in which the art originates from not just the art object or the end result, but the deliberation, the choice, the action of art making.
You begin with the possibilities of the material, and then you let them do what they can do. So the artist is really almost a bystander while he's working.
In Robert Rauschenberg's case, he takes this deliberacy and instead of just employing painterly brushstrokes or highly active pouring and splashing, he adds objects from our daily lives and rearranges them into what he called a combine. He still uses paint, of course, but he builds upon this abstract expressionist tradition of art action, and then he departs from it with his interest in ready-made materials. So Rauschenberg has certainly made his mark on art history, but what many don't know about him is that he was gay. A common perception that characterizes queerness, as evident in his work, is his taste. I mean, critics called his work chic and dazzling, as if this were something to be looked down upon. And it was at this time in the heteronormative fine arts scene. Still, his taste was undeniable. But at this point, taste, or discernment between materials, wasn't the hallmark of the ideal artist. We still wanted the masculine, cool, unornamented Pollock persona. We still admired the way that abstract expressionists removed the material reality of life, most directly the picture of a home or a living space, from art making, to put in its place a more spiritual, indirect interpretation of such. In one of his most famous combines, Bed, Rauschenberg uses a wide array of materials, including a quilt, sheets, and a pillow, alongside the more expected pencil and paint. The use of unconventional ready-made materials, especially those associated with domesticity and subsequently femininity, was entirely antithetical to the abstract expressionist ideal. And beyond his use of materials, Rauschenberg didn't deny the influence of his environment, as in some of the more detached works of abstract expressionists. He even created some of his combines while working in theaters, hotels, and in front of audiences. So by rejecting the hypermasculine emphasis on anti-ornamentation and material detachment, and embracing the cleverly frivolous use of domestic materials and integrations of such settings, Rauschenberg progressed beyond heteronormative artistic trends. Rauschenberg's Bed also references two of his fellow artists, Cy Twombly and Jasper Johns. We see its tribute to Twombly in the dabbled marks upon the pillow, and the geometric patterning of the quilt harks to John's similarly repetitive designs. If it was relatively unknown that Rauschenberg was gay, then it would definitely surprise many to know that he actually had romantic relationships with both Jasper Johns and Cy Twombly. Knowing this, Bed becomes somewhat of a self-portrait of Rauschenberg, or at least somewhat of a love letter, detailing his private life and time spent with both artists that he referenced in this work. Overlapping with the period of their relationship, Rauschenberg and Johns collaborated to design storefront window displays for many high-end shops on Fifth Avenue in New York. Their business was actually quite successful, but the pair didn't want to flaunt it. They viewed it more as a means to survive and provide for themselves. In fact, they worked under the pseudonym Matson Jones and continued to look down on artists like Andy Warhol, who proudly made commercial art. Interestingly enough, Warhol's fame, gained from his commercial work, definitely cast him as an effeminate gay man in the public eye. And even though Warhol enjoys a universally well-known legacy today, it did result in his dismissal by many of his contemporaries. So maybe Rauschenberg wanted to avoid this perception. That fear became very real to him when critics referred to his taste, as evident in his fine art works, as that of a commercial display designer. And they would belittle his works by making this association, and essentially feminizing it by associating it with the act of decoration. This untitled work by Rauschenberg and Johns was created for the Bergdorf Goodman store on Fifth Avenue. On these 4 panels, appropriately sized for a shop window at 12 feet tall, they employed the cyanotype technique to create impressions of sea gods, fish, lobsters, bubbles, and underwater plants, all framed by this cloudy texture. and two of the human figures holding tridents seem to resemble Poseidon, the Greek god of the ocean. In many of his other works, Rauschenberg continues to reference Greek mythology in ways that would connotate homosexuality to some implicit degree. It may not always be appropriate to read so deeply into the symbolism of a closeted artist's body of work. Maybe Rauschenberg depicted some Poseidon-esque figures simply because he wanted to. It might also seem like a stretch to compare the decorative or commercial arts to male homosexuality, but we have to understand that same-sex experiences were not to be discussed openly during this time, especially before the Stonewall riots had facilitated greater visibility for the LGBTQ community. So the gay experience was narrated by gay artists and their critics via suggestion and connotation, and the use of symbols which would be acceptable on the surface level, but if the viewer was in the know, they'd understand their homosexual undertones. In exploring the gap between abstract expressionism and pop art, Rauschenberg adopted an interest in the process of art making and the choices involved, but he didn't deny his artwork the influence and direct inclusion of everyday life. While critics dismissed him as eclectic and commercialized, his decorative abilities and unique perspectives on art making help us understand today how queerness can be found in just about every moment of art history.